Imagine a world without supermarkets, refrigerators, or food delivery. A world where every day is a struggle for survival and hunger is a constant companion. Welcome to the Stone Age, a time when our ancestors ate anything that could provide even a little energy to keep them alive. What seems disgusting and inedible to us today was the difference between life and death for them. Tree bark, partially decomposed meat, larvae, and carrion were all part of the diet of people who survived long enough to pass on their genes to us. Watch the video to the end to find out which Stone Age food contained more protein than modern beef, and why some of these ancient survival methods are still used today. When hunting was unsuccessful and edible plants were scarce, our ancestors turned to what was always at hand: trees. But they didn't eat the fruit, they ate the bark itself. To modern humans, this sounds absurd, but for Stone Age people, bark was a real salvation from starvation. Not all bark was edible. The outer, rough bark of most trees was unsuitable for food. It was too tough and contained toxic substances. But underneath it was a thin layer, the cambium, which became the food of desperation. Cambium is the living tissue of a tree, located between the bark and the wood. It is through this tissue that the tree receives nutrients. This layer is soft, sweet to the taste, and contains carbohydrates that could sustain human life in a critical situation. Birch bark was especially valuable. It contained sugars and starch and also had antiseptic properties. Our ancestors learned to remove the bark in strips, dry it, and grind it into flour. This flour could be used to make primitive flatbread or added to soup. Pine bark was also part of the survival diet. The inner layer of pine bark contained vitamin C, which was critical for preventing scurvy. The bark was scraped off with bone or stone scrapers, then boiled or roasted over charcoal. The process of harvesting bark required caution. Cuts that were too deep could damage the tree, which would deprive the group of this food source in the future. Experienced gatherers knew how to remove the bark in strips, giving the tree a chance to survive. We would be very interested to hear your opinion. What do you think about this method of survival? Write about it in the comments. In a world where large game was rare and fish was not always available, insects became the main source of protein for Stone Age people. What we find disgusting today was then a valuable resource that could ensure the survival of an entire group. Ants were one of the most accessible sources of protein. Large anthills contain thousands of insects rich in protein and fat. Our ancestors destroyed anthills and collected not only adult ants, but also their larvae, soft, nutritious, and easily digestible. Ant larvae contained up to 40% protein, more than modern beef. They were a real delicacy for Stone Age people, providing quick energy and essential amino acids. The larvae could be eaten raw or lightly roasted on hot stones. Termites were even more valuable prey. These social insects lived in huge colonies, and one successful hunt for a termite mound could feed a group of people for several days. Termites contain not only protein, but also fats necessary for maintaining energy. Beetles of various species made up a significant part of the diet. Large larvae found in rotting wood were especially prized, as they were veritable treasure troves of nutrients. One large larva could provide a person's daily protein requirement. Caterpillars were a seasonal but very important food source. In spring and summer, when caterpillars appeared en masse on trees, Stone Age people would go on hunting expeditions. They would clean and cook them over a fire, producing a nutritious meal. To learn how Stone Age people turned deadly poisons into food, watch this video to the end. Modern people would throw away meat that has started to spoil, but for Stone Age people, partially decomposed meat was often the only available source of animal protein. Not only did they learn how to eat such meat safely, but they also discovered fermentation processes that improved its nutritional value. Slaughtering a large animal was a big event, but it was impossible to eat it all at once. Without refrigerators, meat began to spoil after just a few days. Instead of throwing it away, our ancestors learned to distinguish between stages of decay and determine what was still edible. Understanding the process of decay was a matter of life and death. The first signs of spoilage, a slight sour smell and a change in color, did not mean that the meat had become inedible. On the contrary, this was the initial stage of fermentation, which could make the meat more nutritious and easily digestible. Different parts of the carcass spoiled at different rates. The internal organs began to decompose first within a few hours after slaughter. Muscle tissue lasted longer, and fatty tissue could remain edible for weeks. Stone Age people compiled a whole chart of spoilage times for each part of the animal. The ambient temperature had a critical effect on the rate of decomposition. In hot weather, meat spoiled in a matter of hours, while in cold weather it could last for days. In winter, frozen meat hardly spoiled at all, becoming a natural refrigerator. Controlled decomposition was a real art. Meat was deliberately left in cool, ventilated places where it began to ferment under the influence of beneficial bacteria. This process not only preserved the meat, but also made it softer and easier to digest. Choosing a place for controlled fermentation required deep knowledge. The ideal place was a cool cave with constant air circulation. A place that was too humid promoted the growth of dangerous mold, while one that was too dry dried the meat to an inedible state. The fermentation process began with the natural enzymes contained in the meat itself. These enzymes broke down the muscle fibers, making the meat softer. Then lactic acid bacteria came into play, creating an acidic environment that prevented the growth of pathogenic microorganisms. The signs of proper fermentation differed from those of dangerous decay. Well-fermented meat had a sour but not pungent smell, changed color evenly, and retained a dense consistency. Dangerous decay was accompanied by a pungent, putrid odor, a slimy surface, and uneven color changes. The fermentation process of Koppelhem could last from 3 months to a year. During this time, the meat completely changed its structure, becoming soft, almost creamy. The taste became very intense, sour, and pungent, but the nutritional value increased many times over. For modern humans, eating carrion seems unthinkable, but for Stone Age people, it was a valuable source of meat that did not require hunting. The ability to find and safely use dead animal carcasses was an important survival skill. Birds circling in the sky signaled the presence of a carcass nearby. Stone Age people learned to read these signs and often reached the carcass before it had completely spoiled. Competition for carrion was fierce. People had to compete with hyenas, wolves, and other predators. Sometimes groups of people would deliberately drive predators away from their prey using fire, shouting, and stone tools. Fresh carrion was a real find. An animal that died of natural causes or from wounds could provide a group with meat for weeks. It was important to quickly cut up the carcass and distribute the meat before it spoiled. Determining the cause of death was critical. Experienced hunters could tell from external signs whether an animal had died of disease, injury, or old age. Meat from sick animals was dangerous, but meat from animals that had died of injuries remained edible. Winter carrion was especially valuable. The cold naturally preserved the meat, allowing it to be used for months. Frozen carcasses became a strategic resource that helped people survive the hungriest time of the year. In the next chapter, you will learn what treasures Stone Age people found underground. When the surface of the earth could not provide enough food, Stone Age people turned to nature's underground pantries. Plant roots, tubers, and bulbs were a reliable source of carbohydrates that was available even in the hungriest times. Digging was one of the most important survival skills. Women and teenagers spent hours digging up edible roots with sharpened sticks and bone tools. It was hard work, but it could save the life of the entire group. Wild potatoes were one of the most valuable finds. The small tubers, hidden deep in the ground, contained starch and were relatively safe to eat. They could be eaten raw, but were more often baked in the ashes of a fire. Burdock roots were available almost everywhere and at any time of the year. These long, fleshy roots contained aniline, a natural sugar that provided quick energy. Burdock roots could be eaten raw or cooked in primitive pots. Yams and other tropical tubers were a staple food in warm regions. These large underground plant organs contained enormous amounts of starch and could feed a large group of people. Some species required special processing to remove toxins. The process of preparing roots and tubers was varied. They were boiled in leather bags with hot stones, baked in earthen ovens, and dried in the sun for storage. Each method had its advantages depending on the type of plant. Storing underground plants allowed for the creation of reserves for the winter. Dried roots could be stored in special hiding places for months, providing carbohydrates during the hungriest times. Some roots were naturally preserved in the cold ground. Finding edible roots required deep knowledge of plants and their seasonal cycles. Experienced gatherers knew when roots were most nutritious, where to find the largest specimens, and how to determine the presence of underground organs from the above-ground part of the plant. In a world of constant hunger, some foods stood out for their exceptional nutritional value. These ancient superfoods were rare and hard to come by, but they provided a concentration of nutrients that could save lives in critical moments. Wild fish roe was one such treasure. In the spring, during spawning season, Stone Age people collected the roe of salmon, trout, and other fish. This roe contained a huge amount of protein, fats, and vitamins in concentrated form. Bird eggs were a seasonal delicacy, available only in spring and summer. The eggs of waterfowl, which nested in colonies, were particularly valuable. One large egg could provide a person's daily protein requirement. The brains of large animals were an exceptionally nutritious food. They contained fats necessary for human brain development, as well as many vitamins. Harvesting brains required special tools to open the skull. The livers of predatory animals contained concentrated vitamins, especially vitamin A. However, they could also be toxic in large quantities. Stone Age people learned to eat liver in small portions, getting the maximum benefit without poisoning themselves. Wild honey was a rare and valuable product. It provided fast carbohydrates and had antibacterial properties. Harvesting honey from wild bee nests was an extremely dangerous but extremely profitable undertaking. The bone marrow of large bones was a source of essential fatty acids. The long bones of mammoths, bison, and other large animals contained marrow that was more nutritious than meat. Extracting the marrow required special techniques for breaking the bones. Some types of mushrooms were true nutrient concentrates. They contained complete proteins, B vitamins, and rare trace elements. In the next chapter, we will discuss how humans transformed deadly poisons into safe food. In times of famine, Stone Age people often had to eat things that would normally be considered inedible or even poisonous. They developed complex methods for processing toxic plants and animals, turning poisons into food. Acorns contained large amounts of tannins, substances that made them bitter and toxic. But people learned to soak acorns in running water for weeks, gradually washing out the tannins and obtaining nutritious flour. Cassava roots in tropical regions contained hydrocyanic acid, a powerful poison. However, the process of grinding, pressing, and prolonged drying neutralized the toxins, leaving a valuable source of starch. Some types of legumes contain alkaloids that could cause poisoning. Prolonged soaking and repeated water changes made these beans safe and nutritious. The process could take days, but the result was worth the time spent. Some mushrooms were used as food in small quantities after special treatment. They were boiled in several changes of water, with the broth being drained each time. The remaining pulp was less toxic, although it still required caution. The berries of some plants were poisonous when fresh, but became edible after fermentation or drying. Time and natural decomposition processes neutralized the toxins, leaving the nutrients. The meat of some animals contained natural toxins. Polar bear liver was toxic due to excess vitamin A, but small portions of meat from other parts of the carcass were safe and nutritious. Fugu fish and other poisonous sea creatures required exceptional skill to prepare. Removing the poisonous glands and organs made the rest of the fish edible, but the slightest mistake could have dire consequences. The green parts of potatoes and tomatoes contained solanine, a toxic substance. People learned to remove the green parts and use only the healthy parts of the plants, obtaining valuable food without the risk of poisoning. The milk of some animals contained toxins during certain periods. Nursing females that fed on poisonous plants passed the toxins on through their milk. Experienced hunters knew when such milk was safe and when it was not. Detoxification methods were passed down from generation to generation as vital knowledge. The elders of the groups were the keepers of this information, and their passing could mean the loss of critical survival skills. Mistakes in processing poisonous food were dangerous, but hunger forced people to take risks. Groups often used animal testing or had the least valuable members of the group taste the food first. Winter was the most severe test for Stone Age people. When their stored supplies ran out and nature was hidden under snow, the real struggle for survival began. At these critical moments, people ate anything that could provide even a little energy. Tree bark became the main source of carbohydrates in winter. It was difficult to find under the snow, but experienced gatherers knew how to identify suitable trees. Birch bark was scraped off even in severe frosts, risking frostbite for a few calories. Pine and spruce needles contained vitamin C, which prevented scurvy. They were brewed as tea or chewed raw. The taste was bitter and resinous, but this food could save people from serious diseases that could affect entire groups in winter. Frozen berries left on the bushes were a valuable find. Rowan, hawthorn, and rosehip berries retained their properties even after frost. Sometimes they were found in the hiding places of squirrels and other animals. Ice and snow replaced water, but consuming them required energy for warming. People learned to melt snow in animal stomachs or primitive vessels, saving calories on heating the liquid to body temperature. Winter hunting for small animals was a desperate attempt to obtain protein. Mice, voles, hares, any meat was valuable. Traps made of bones and sinews allowed hunting without wasting energy on pursuit. Ice fishing was a difficult but vital skill. Punching holes in the ice with stone tools required enormous effort, but fish was one of the few sources of fresh meat in winter. Carcasses preserved better in winter, and there was less competition for them. Predators also went hungry, and people could sometimes find frozen carcasses abandoned by wolves or bears. Such finds were a lifesaver for entire groups. Fat was critically important in winter for maintaining body temperature. It was extracted from any available sources: bone marrow, the subcutaneous layer of animals, even insect fat. The calorie content of fat was several times higher than that of proteins or carbohydrates. Insects dried in the summer were a lifesaver during the hungriest months. Properly preserved larvae and adult insects retained their nutritional properties and provided protein when other sources were unavailable. In conditions of constant hunger, the food distribution system could determine who would survive and who would die. Stone Age people developed complex social mechanisms that maximized the chances of survival for the group, but often at the expense of individual members. The food hierarchy was strict. The best cuts of meat went to the strongest hunters, those who could provide food tomorrow. Women of childbearing age were given priority in the distribution of fats and vitamins necessary for reproduction. The elderly and the sick often received leftovers or were left without food altogether. This may seem cruel, but in conditions where there was not enough food for everyone, such a system ensured the survival of the people most important to the group. The communal consumption of questionable food was a form of social control. If someone found suspicious mushrooms or meat from an unknown animal, the whole group ate it at the same time. This prevented one person from hoarding dangerous food and distributed the risk of poisoning. Food storage was a collective endeavor, but access to supplies was strictly controlled. Food theft was punishable by expulsion from the group, which in Stone Age conditions was equivalent to a death sentence. Such rules maintained discipline at critical moments. Seasonal migrations of groups were often determined by the availability of food. People followed animal herds, moved to fish spawning grounds, or areas where edible plants ripen en masse. Such mobility was key to survival. The need to eat anything and everything in order to survive has had a profound impact on human evolution. Our digestive system, metabolism, and even behavior have been shaped by constant hunger and the need to extract nutrients from any available sources. The human stomach has adapted to digest a variety of often questionable foods. The high acidity of gastric juice has allowed us to safely consume partially decomposed meat that would be dangerous for many other animals. The development of the liver as a powerful detoxification organ was a direct response to the need to neutralize toxins from plant and animal foods. Our liver can process an amazing variety of toxic substances. The ability to store fat became a critical adaptive advantage. During periods of abundance, the body could store energy in the form of fat deposits, which helped us survive in times of famine. This ability has remained with us to this day. Human omnivorousness is the result of millions of years of adaptation to a varied and unpredictable diet. Our teeth, jaws, and digestive system are optimized for processing both plant and animal foods. The development of a large brain was made possible by high-quality animal-based food. Bone marrow, liver, and other animal organs provided fatty acids and other substances necessary for the growth of brain tissue. Human social instincts were partly shaped around the procurement and distribution of food. Our tendency toward cooperation, altruism, and the formation of hierarchies has its roots in the need to efficiently obtain and share scarce food resources. The taste preferences of modern humans still reflect ancient survival needs. Our love of fatty, salty, and sweet foods is an echo of a time when such foods were rare and critical to survival. The ability to endure hunger and recover quickly from periods of malnutrition helped our ancestors survive cycles of abundance and scarcity. This adaptation has remained in our physiology to this day. Psychological resilience to eating unpleasant foods was an important survival skill. People who could overcome their disgust and eat insects, partially decomposed meat, or bitter roots were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. The development of language and culture was closely linked to the transmission of knowledge about food. Information about what was edible and what was poisonous, how to process dangerous food, and where to find edible food had to be communicated accurately and effectively. Our modern aversion to certain types of food is an evolutionary defense mechanism against potentially dangerous products. But in a critical situation, these barriers can be overcome, as our ancestors did thousands of years ago. We conclude our journey into the world of Stone Age survival. Today we learned that the line between edible and inedible was blurred for our ancestors. Tree bark, insects, fermented meat, carrion, all of these were part of the diet of people who survived long enough for us to exist today. These extreme survival methods shaped our physiology, psychology, and culture. Our ability to digest a variety of foods, store fat, and work together for a common goal are all legacies of those difficult times. Which Stone Age survival method did you find most surprising or shocking? In a critical situation, would you be able to overcome modern ideas about what is acceptable to eat? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to learn more about how our ancestors coped with the impossible.